If you've ever complained about a doctor's appointment, wait until you hear what ancient physicians prescribed for headaches. Spoiler alert, it involved drilling holes in skulls. Tonight, we're diving into the strangest, most bizarre medical treatments from ancient civilizations. Practices so odd they'll make you grateful for modern medicine, while hopefully lulling you into a peaceful sleep. I'm your host for tonight's journey through medical history, and over the next hour we'll explore treatments that ranged from the merely unusual to the downright dangerous. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Get comfortable, close your eyes, and let the steady rhythm of ancient knowledge guide you into peaceful rest. So get comfortable, close your eyes, and let's travel back thousands of years to discover how our ancestors tried to heal the human body. Our journey begins in ancient Egypt, around 3000 BCE, along the banks of the Nile River. The Egyptians were remarkably advanced in many ways. They built pyramids, developed complex writing systems, and created detailed medical papyri that still exist today. But their medical treatments, well, let's just say they had some interesting ideas about how the human body worked. The Edwin Smith Papyrus, dating back to 1600 BCE, is one of the oldest known medical documents. It contains 48 cases of injuries and their treatments. But it's the remedies described in other papyri that truly showcase the bizarre nature of ancient Egyptian medicine. Take headaches, for instance. Today you might reach for an aspirin or ibuprofen. Ancient Egyptians had a different approach entirely. They believed headaches were caused by evil spirits entering through the ears, so their solution was to stuff the patient's ears with a mixture of honey, cedar oil, and frankincense, then have them lie on their side for hours while chanting specific incantations. But that was just the beginning. For more severe headaches, Egyptian physicians would prepare a paste made from crushed beetles, mixed with the fat of a hippopotamus, and apply it directly to the forehead. The logic was that the strong smell would drive away the malevolent spirits causing the pain. Patients would often wear this pungent mixture for days, creating a rather aromatic situation. Eye problems were treated with equal creativity. Egyptians suffered frequently from eye infections due to the sandy, dusty environment along the Nile. Their solution, a mixture of human breast milk, honey, and ground-up pearls, applied directly to the affected eye. The breast milk was believed to have magical properties, while the pearls were thought to restore clarity and brightness to the vision. For more serious eye conditions, they would use a concoction made from the bile of various animals, particularly tortoise bile, which was considered especially potent. The patient would lie still while the physician carefully dripped this mixture into their eyes, often causing intense burning and tearing. The theory was that the tears would wash away the illness, though more often than not, it simply made the condition worse. Digestive issues were approached with similar logic, but even more unusual ingredients. The Ebers Papyrus, another famous medical text, describes a remedy for stomach problems that included crushed ostrich eggs, fermented fish sauce, and something called the breath of a donkey, which historians believe was actually dried donkey dung, ground into powder and mixed with beer. This mixture was supposed to be consumed on an empty stomach at dawn, while facing east toward the rising sun. The patient would then have to remain perfectly still for an entire day, subsisting only on this remedial drink. You can imagine how effective this was for treating digestive complaints. Perhaps most bizarrely, Egyptian physicians believed that many illnesses originated from problems with the heart, not in the cardiovascular sense we understand today, but as the seat of emotion and thought. They developed elaborate treatments involving the placement of various objects on the chest, including scarab beetles, crystals, and specially prepared amulets made from the organs of sacred animals. One particularly detailed treatment involved wrapping the patient in linen bandages soaked in a mixture of natron, myrrh, and the rendered fat of a sacred cat. The patient would be left wrapped like a mummy for 3 days and nights, during which time family members would maintain a constant vigil, burning incense, and reciting prayers to various gods. The Egyptians also pioneered what we might recognize as an early form of psychiatric treatment. Though their methods were, they believed mental illness was caused by the heart becoming disconnected from the body. So they would perform elaborate rituals involving the patient being buried up to their neck in sand from the Nile riverbank, with only their head exposed. The theory was that the sand would reconnect the patient's heart to the earth, restoring their mental balance. Patients would remain in this position for hours, sometimes days, while priests performed purification ceremonies around them. The physical discomfort was considered part of the healing process, as it would supposedly drive out the confused spirits that had taken residence in the patient's mind. Moving eastward to ancient Mesopotamia, we encounter the Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians, who developed their own fascinating approaches to medicine around. These civilizations believed that illness was primarily caused by demonic possession or divine punishment, which led to some truly extraordinary treatment methods. The Code of Hammurabi, dating to around 1750 BCE, actually contains some of the earliest known medical regulations, including fees for different types of treatment and punishments for physicians who caused harm to their patient. But the treatments themselves were often more dangerous than the original ailments. Mesopotamian physicians, known as Asu, worked alongside priest healers called asap. The Asu focused on practical treatments, though their definition of practical was quite different from ours, while the Asupu handled the spiritual aspects of healing, which they believed were equally important. For fever, which was common in the marshy regions of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the treatment involved creating a small clay figurine of the patient, then subjecting this figurine to the same illness. The theory was that the demon causing the fever would transfer from the patient to the figurine, which would then be buried or thrown into the river. But they didn't stop there. The patient would also be required to drink a concoction made from crushed bricks from a demolished temple, mixed with holy water and the ground bones of a white dove. This mixture was believed to have protective properties that would prevent the demon from returning. The process could take weeks, during which the patient would consume nothing but this brick and bone mixture, often becoming severely malnourished. The weight loss and weakness that resulted were interpreted as signs that the treatment was working. The demon was supposedly being starved out of the body. Respiratory ailments were treated with equally complex procedures. Patients with persistent coughs would be required to inhale the smoke from burning mixtures of sulfur, cedar wood, and dried fish scales. The smoke ceremony would take place in a sealed room, with the patient's head covered by a cloth tent positioned over a brazier containing the burning materials. The intense smoke would often cause severe coughing fits, which the physicians interpreted as the demon being forced out through the lungs. Patients would remain in these smoke-filled chambers for hours, often becoming dizzy and disoriented from the lack of oxygen. Some would even lose consciousness, which was considered a sign that the treatment was reaching its peak effectiveness. For wounds and injuries, Mesopotamian medicine took a particularly gory turn. They believed that fresh blood had healing properties, so patients with cuts or wounds would have fresh animal blood, usually from recently slaughtered goats or sheep, poured directly onto their injury. The blood was supposed to feed the wound and encourage healing, but of course this practice often led to severe infections. When infections developed, they were treated with more blood, creating a vicious cycle that frequently proved fatal. Mental illness was approached with elaborate exorcism rituals that could last for days. The patient would be tied to a chair or bed, then subjected to a series of increasingly intense procedures designed to make their body an unpleasant place for demons to inhabit. This included being covered in a paste made from mustard seeds, hot peppers, and vinegar, which would burn the skin and cause intense discomfort. The patient would then be placed in a room with multiple fires burning different combinations of herbs and spices, creating a hot, smoky, and overwhelming environment. Throughout this process, priests would chant continuously, bang drums, and ring bells to create a cacophony designed to drive out evil spirits. The patient would often become delirious from the heat, smoke, and sensory overload, which was interpreted as the demons fighting to remain in the body. One of the most bizarre treatments involved a procedure for headaches that required the patient to be suspended upside down from a wooden frame for several hours, while a mixture of fermented barley and sheep's urine was slowly dripped onto their forehead. The theory was that the headache-causing demon would become confused by the inverted position and the strange mixture, and would flee the body in bewilderment. The Mesopotamians also developed an early form of what we might call psychiatric medication. Though their version was quite different from modern pharmaceuticals, they would prepare complex potions containing various psychoactive plants, including certain mushrooms and fermented plant extracts, mixed with alcohol and animal products. These concoctions would often cause hallucinations, vivid dreams, and altered states of consciousness. The physicians would carefully observe the patient's behavior and statements, while under the influence of these substances, interpreting their words and actions as messages from the spirit world about the nature of their illness and the appropriate treatment. Ancient Greece, the birthplace of rational thought and philosophy, might seem like it would have developed more logical approaches to medicine. And indeed, Greek physicians like Hippocrates did establish many principles that form the foundation of modern medical ethics. But even in this enlightened civilization, medical practice often took some truly bizarre turns. The Greeks believed in the theory of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, and thought that illness resulted from an imbalance of these bodily fluids. This led to treatments focused on restoring balance, often through methods that seem quite extreme by today's standards. Bloodletting was perhaps the most common treatment, but Greek physicians took it to elaborate extremes. They didn't simply make a small cut and let some blood flow out. Instead, they developed complex systems for determining exactly how much blood to remove, from which part of the body, and at what time of day or season. For example, a patient with a headache might have blood drawn from a vein in their temple, but only during a waning moon, and only if they had been fasting for at least 3 days before. The blood would be collected in special vessels and carefully examined for color, consistency, and even smell to determine the exact nature of the humoral imbalance. But they also had some truly unusual approaches. For the melancholy, which they believed was caused by an excess of black bile, the treatment involved a combination of diet, exercise, and what they called shock therapy. Though their version was quite different from anything we might recognize today, the patient would be taken to a cliff overlooking the sea and suddenly pushed toward the edge, stopping just short of the precipice. The shock and fear were supposed to restart the heart and rebalance the humour. This would be repeated multiple times over several days, with the patient never knowing when the next treatment would occur. Greek physicians also developed elaborate purging treatments that make modern medical procedures seem gentle by comparison. A patient with digestive problems might be given a mixture of various herbs, including hellebore, a plant we now know is highly toxic, mixed with wine and honey. This concoction would cause violent vomiting and diarrhea that could last for days. The patient would be carefully monitored to ensure they didn't die from dehydration, but they would be kept in this state until the physician determined that enough bad humours had been expelled from the body. The Greeks were also pioneers in what we might call cosmetic medicine, though their methods were often more harmful than helpful. For baldness, they recommended a treatment involving the application of a paste made from crushed beetles, bear fat, and various herbs, which would be rubbed into the scalp daily for months. This mixture often caused severe skin irritation and infection, leading to painful sores and, ironically, even more hair loss. But the Greeks persisted with this treatment because they believed that the burning sensation indicated that new hair growth was being stimulated. For wrinkles and signs of aging, Greek physicians prescribed treatments involving the application of various animal products to the skin. One popular remedy involved covering the face with a mask made from crushed snails, honey, and the ground shells of sea creatures. The patient would wear this mask for hours, during which time it would harden and become difficult to remove. The process of removing the mask often tore the skin, causing bleeding and scarring that made the patient look worse than before the treatment. Greek dentistry was particularly brutal for toothaches. The standard treatment involved heating a bronze rod until it was red hot, then carefully applying it to the affected tooth to burn out the source of pain. As you might imagine, this often resulted in severe burns to the mouth and tongue, and frequently caused the tooth to crack or shatter entirely. For loose teeth, Greek dentists would use a technique involving the insertion of small bronze wires through the gums to anchor the tooth in place. These wires would often cause infections and abscesses, leading to even more serious dental problems. The Greeks also developed some unusual treatments for mental illness that reflected their philosophical beliefs about the nature of the mind and soul. They believed that madness was often caused by the soul becoming unmoored from the body, so they developed treatments designed to re-anchor it. One such treatment involved burying the patient up to their neck in earth that had been blessed by priests of various gods, then surrounding them with a circle of burning torch. The patient would remain in this position for an entire night, during which time philosophers and priests would engage in debates about the nature of reality, consciousness, and the soul. The theory was that exposure to these philosophical discussions would help the patient's soul remember its proper place in the cosmic order. Often patients would emerge from this experience more confused than before, but any improvement in their condition was attributed to the success of the philosophical treatment. Greek physicians also believed that many illnesses were caused by corrupt air, or bad vapors, leading to treatments involving elaborate breathing exercises and exposure to what they considered purifying substance. Patients with respiratory ailments would be required to inhale the smoke from burning combinations of various herbs, resins, and even certain types of dung. These inhalation treatments would take place in specially constructed chambers where the patient would be sealed in with the burning materials for hours at a time. The intense smoke would often cause severe respiratory distress, but this was interpreted as a sign that the treatment was working to expel the corrupted air from the lungs. The Roman Empire, known for its engineering marvels and military might, approached medicine with the same ambitious excess that characterized their architecture and conquest. Roman physicians inherited many Greek medical theories, but often took them to even more extreme lengths, creating treatments that were as elaborate as they were ineffective. Roman medicine was heavily influenced by their belief in the importance of social status and divine favor. Treatments often varied dramatically, depending on the patient's position in society, with elaborate and expensive procedures reserved for the wealthy, while slaves and common citizens received much simpler, though often equally bizarre treatments. For the Roman elite, one of the most popular treatments for various ailments was the imperial bath, a complex procedure that involved soaking in a series of baths filled with different substances. The first bath would contain wine, specifically the most expensive wine available, as Romans believed that quality ingredients produced better results. The second bath would be filled with milk from animals that had been fed special diets of herbs and flowers. The third bath contained a mixture of honey, rosewater, and crushed pearls. The entire process could take an entire day, with the patient moving from bath to bath at precisely timed intervals, determined by astrologers based on the patient's birth chart. But Romans also developed some truly unusual treatments that reflected their military culture. For injuries sustained in battle, Roman physicians would often prescribe treatments involving the application of various substances taken from the battlefield itself. This included dirt from the exact spot where the injury occurred, mixed with the blood of the enemy who had caused the wound. The theory was that this would create a spiritual connection that would encourage healing. Obviously, applying contaminated battlefield dirt to open wounds often led to severe infections, but Romans interpreted fever and inflammation as signs that the treatment was working to burn out the foreign influence of the enemy's weapon. Roman physicians also developed elaborate treatments for what they called campaign fatigue, what we might today recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. Soldiers returning from long military campaigns would often suffer from nightmares, anxiety, and depression. The Roman treatment involved a ceremony called purification through ordeal, where the affected soldier would be required to reenact their most traumatic battle experiences, but with a twist. They would be given wooden weapons, and made to fight against actors dressed as their former enemy. This mock combat would continue for hours, sometimes days, until the soldier either collapsed from exhaustion or experienced what the physicians called victory catharsis, a moment of emotional release that was supposed to purge the traumatic memories from their mind. The wealthy Romans also had access to what they called exotic medicine, treatments involving rare substances imported from the far reaches of the empire. For digestive problems, Roman physicians would prescribe a treatment involving the consumption of imperial honey that had been aged in the tombs of Egyptian pharaohs for at least a century. This honey was believed to have absorbed the wisdom and strength of the dead rulers, making it a powerful medicine. The fact that tomb honey was often contaminated with various bacteria and oddities and fungi only added to its supposed potency, though it frequently caused severe illness in patients who consumed it. For skin conditions, Romans favored treatments involving the application of various exotic animal products. One popular remedy involved covering the affected area with a paste made from the ground shells of rare sea creatures, mixed with the fat of lions and the powdered bones of elephants. This mixture would be applied in elaborate patterns based on astrological charts, with different designs prescribed for different types of skin problems. The patient would wear this paste for weeks, refreshing it daily with new applications, often developing severe allergic reactions that were interpreted as signs of the medicine's effectiveness. Roman dentistry was particularly sophisticated in its complexity, if not its effective. For tooth problems, Roman dentists would often prescribe treatments involving the insertion of small gold or silver objects into the mouth, which was supposed to purify the oral cavity and prevent future dental problems. These metal objects, sometimes shaped like tiny animals or mythological creatures, would be attached to the teeth with various adhesives made from tree resins and animal products. The weight and foreign nature of these objects often caused more dental problems than they solved, but wealthy Romans considered them fashionable, as well as medicinal. The Romans also developed elaborate treatments for mental illness that reflected their beliefs about the relationship between the mind and the social order. They believed that madness was often caused by a person's failure to understand their proper place in society, so treatments involved elaborate role-playing exercises designed to reinforce social hierarchy. A mentally ill nobleman might be required to spend weeks performing the duties of a slave, while a mentally ill slave might be temporarily elevated to a position of authority. The theory was that experiencing different social roles would help the patient understand the natural order and restore their mental balance. These role reversals often lasted for months and were accompanied by elaborate ceremonies involving the entire household. The psychological impact of these treatments was often profound, though rarely in the ways the physicians intended. Roman physicians also believed that many illnesses were caused by temporal displacement, the idea that a person's soul was somehow living in the wrong time period. Treatments for this condition involved elaborate ceremonies designed to realign the patient with their proper historical moments. This might involve dressing the patient in clothing from different historical periods, feeding them foods that were popular in various eras, and exposing them to music, art, and literature from different time periods, until the physicians determined which era the patient's soul truly belonged to. Once the proper time period was identified, the patient would be required to live as if they were actually in that era for an extended period, sometimes permanently adopting the dress, speech, and customs of their true historical time. Ancient Chinese medicine, with its emphasis on balance and harmony, might seem more rational than some of the treatments we've discussed so far. And indeed, traditional Chinese medicine did develop many concepts that have proven to have some validity. Acupuncture, for instance, has shown genuine therapeutic benefits in modern studies. But ancient Chinese physicians also developed some truly bizarre treatments based on their complex theories about the flow of qi, the balance of yin and yang, and the relationship between the human body and the natural world. The concept of qi, the life force that flows through the body, led to some particularly unusual treatment methods. Chinese physicians believed that illness was often caused by blockages or imbalances in the flow of qi, and they developed elaborate techniques for correcting these problems. One such technique involved what they called directional healing, where the patient would be required to face specific directions at specific times of day, while consuming carefully prepared herbal mixtures. But the directions weren't simply north, south, east, and west. They were based on complex calculations involving the patient's birth date, the current phase of the moon, the season, and even the weather condition. A patient with a stomach ailment might be required to face northeast while consuming a mixture of ginseng and tiger bone powder, but only during the 3rd hour after sunrise on days when the wind was blowing from the southwest. Getting any of these factors wrong was believed to not only negate the treatment, but potentially make the patient's condition worse. The Chinese also developed treatments based on their belief in the 5 elements theory. The idea that all things in the universe are composed of combinations of wood, fire, earth, metal. Illnesses were diagnosed based on which elements were out of balance, leading to some truly creative treatment approaches. For example, a patient diagnosed with excess fire might be treated with a combination of substances associated with water and earth element. This could involve being buried up to the neck in specially prepared mud, made from earth collected from 5 different provinces, while having water from sacred springs slowly dripped onto their head for hours at a time. The mud would often contain various herbs and minerals that could cause skin irritation and allergic reactions, but these were interpreted as signs that the fire element was being successfully drawn out of the body. Chinese physicians also believed that many illnesses were caused by the influence of celestial bodies, leading to treatments that had to be precisely timed according to astronomical events. A patient with headaches might be required to undergo treatment only during lunar eclipses, when the moon's influence was believed to be at its weakest. The treatment itself might involve having small holes drilled into the skull, similar to trepanation in other cultures, but the Chinese version included the additional step of inserting thin needles made from different metals based on the patient's astrological chart. These needles would be left in place for days or weeks, often causing infections and brain damage. The Chinese also developed elaborate dietary treatments based on their theories about the thermal properties of different foods. They believed that all foods were either hot or cold in nature, and that illnesses were often caused by consuming too many foods of one type or the other. For a patient with a hot illness, the treatment might involve consuming only cold foods for months at a time. But the classification of foods as hot or cold wasn't based on temperature or spiciness. It was based on complex theories about their effects on the body's internal energy. Some foods that we might consider quite normal were classified as extremely hot or cold, and were prescribed in very specific combinations. A patient might be required to eat nothing but winter melon, cucumber, and tofu for weeks, while avoiding all meat, grains, and fruit. These extreme dietary restrictions often led to severe malnutrition, but weight loss and weakness were interpreted as signs that the body's thermal balance was being restored. Chinese medicine also included treatments based on the belief that certain animals possessed medicinal properties that could be transferred to humans through consumption or direct contact. This led some particularly unusual therapeutic practice. For example, patients with joint problems might be prescribed a treatment involving being sealed in a room with live snakes for several hours. The theory was that the snake's ability to move fluidly would somehow transfer to the patient, improving their flexibility and reducing pain. The patient would sit perfectly still while dozens of snakes slithered around and over their body. Snake bites were not uncommon during these treatments, but they were considered part of the therapeutic process. The venom was believed to have healing properties that would enhance the treatment's effectiveness. For mental illness, Chinese physicians developed a treatment called animal spirit therapy, where patients would be required to live in close contact with specific animals for extended periods. The choice of animal was based on the patient's birth year in the Chinese zodiac, combined with the specific nature of their mental illness. A patient born in the year of the tiger who was suffering from depression might be required to live in a cage with actual tigers for several weeks. The theory was that they would absorb the tiger's strength and courage, curing their depression. Needless to say, these treatments were often fatal, but deaths were attributed to the patient's inability to properly connect with their animal spirit, rather than to the obvious dangers of the treatment itself. Chinese physicians also believed that many illnesses were caused by the presence of evil winds in the body, leading to treatments designed to expel these malevolent forces. One such treatment involved creating elaborate wind tunnels using bamboo pipes and fans, then directing specific types of wind currents over the patient's body. The patient would be positioned in the center of this artificial wind system for hours, while physicians adjusted the direction and intensity of the air currents according to complex formula. The treatment was considered successful when the patient began to shiver uncontrollably, which was interpreted as a sign that the evil winds were being driven out of the body. Ancient India developed one of the world's most sophisticated medical systems in Ayurveda, which recognized the importance of prevention, lifestyle, and holistic treatment. The classic texts like the Charaka Samhita and Sushruta Samhita contain remarkably advanced surgical techniques and anatomical knowledge. However, ancient Indian medicine also included some extremely unusual treatments based on complex theories about the relationship between physical health, spiritual purity, and cosmic forces. The concept of karma played a significant role in Indian medical theory. Physicians believed that many illnesses were the result of actions in previous lives, which led to treatments designed not just to address physical symptoms, but to purify the soul and balance karmic debt. For chronic illnesses that didn't respond to conventional treatments, patients might be prescribed what was called purification through ordeal, a series of increasingly difficult physical and spiritual challenges designed to burn away negative karma. This could involve fasting for weeks at a time while performing specific yoga poses, often in extreme weather conditions. A patient with joint problems might be required to hold difficult poses for hours in the blazing sun, with the pain and discomfort considered necessary for karmic purification. The combination of extreme physical stress, dehydration, and malnutrition often made patients' conditions worse, but this was interpreted as a necessary part of the healing process. The body had to suffer before it could be purified. Ancient Indian physicians also developed treatments based on the theory of the chakras, energy centers in the body that needed to be properly aligned for good health. This led to some particularly unusual therapeutic practices involving the manipulation of these energy centers. For digestive problems, patients might undergo a treatment called fire chakra activation, which involved having small fires lit on specific points of their body, corresponding to the solar plexus chakra. These fires would be carefully controlled to avoid causing severe burns, but the heat and smoke were intended to activate the energy center and restore proper digestive function. The fires would be maintained for hours, with the patient lying perfectly still while priests chanted specific mantras. The combination of heat, smoke inhalation, and stress often caused patients to lose consciousness, which was interpreted as a sign that the chakra was being successfully activated. The Indian medical system also included elaborate treatments based on the belief that illness could be caused by the influence of malevolent spirits or demons. These treatments often involved complex exorcism rituals that could last for days or weeks. The patient would be placed in a specially prepared room, surrounded by various protective symbols and substances. They would then be subjected to a series of increasingly intense sensory experiences designed to make their body an unpleasant place for evil spirits to inhabit. This might include being covered in pastes made from hot spices and herbs, exposed to loud noises and bright lights, and required to consume various bitter and unpleasant tasting medicines. The goal was to create such an uncomfortable environment that any possessing spirits would choose to leave the body. These exorcism treatments often lasted for weeks, during which time the patient would be kept in a state of constant discomfort and sensory overload. Many patients emerged from these treatments in worse physical and mental condition than when they began, but any improvement was attributed to the successful expulsion of evil spirits. Ancient Indian medicine also included treatments based on the belief that the human body needed to be in harmony with cosmic cycles and celestial movement. This led to the development of what was called astronomical medicine, where treatments were precisely timed according to the positions of planets and stars. A patient with a particular ailment might be required to undergo treatment only during specific astronomical events, perhaps only when certain planets were in alignment, or during particular phases of the moon. The treatment itself might be relatively simple, but the timing requirements could mean waiting months or even years for the proper cosmic condition. During these waiting periods, patients' conditions often deteriorated significantly, but physicians maintained that premature treatment would be ineffective or even harmful. The cosmic timing was considered more important than the patient's immediate suffering. The Indian medical system also included elaborate treatments involving the use of various gemstones and precious metals, based on the belief that these materials possessed healing properties that could be transferred to the human body. For example, a patient with eye problems might be required to stare at specific gemstones for hours at a time, while consuming water that had been infused with powdered precious metals. The theory was that the pure energy of these materials would cleanse and heal the affected organ. These treatments often involved consuming potentially toxic substances, powdered metals and ground gemstones, which could cause serious poisoning, but the symptoms of metal poisoning were often interpreted as signs that the treatment was working to purge impurities from the body. Indian physicians also developed treatments based on complex theories about the relationship between different parts of the body and various aspects of the natural world. This led to some particularly unusual therapeutic approaches involving exposure to specific natural elements. For skin conditions, patients might be required to roll naked in mud from sacred rivers, but only mud that had been blessed by priests and mixed with specific herbs and flowers. The patient would remain covered in this mud for days, allowing it to dry and crack on their skin before washing it off and repeating the process. The mud often contained bacteria and parasites that could cause serious skin infections, but these were interpreted as signs that the treatment was drawing out impurities from the body. For respiratory problems, patients might undergo treatments involving exposure to smoke from burning combinations of various sacred woods, herbs, and other substances. But these weren't simple inhalation treatments. They were elaborate ceremonies that could last for days. The patient would be placed in a sealed chamber, filled with smoke from these burning materials, often becoming severely oxygen deprived and disoriented. The altered state of consciousness that resulted was interpreted as a spiritual experience that would aid in the healing process. The ancient civilizations of the Americas, including the Maya, Aztec, and Inca, developed their own unique medical traditions that were deeply intertwined with their religious and spiritual beliefs. These cultures viewed illness as a disruption in the harmony between the physical and spiritual worlds, leading to treatments that were often as mystical as they were medical. The Maya, who flourished in Central America from around 2000 BCE to 1500 CE, believed that illness was often caused by the displeasure of gods or the influence of malevolent spirits. This led to medical treatments that were essentially elaborate religious ceremonies designed to appease divine forces and restore spiritual balance. For headaches, Maya healers would perform a ritual called skull opening, which involved making small incisions in the scalp and inserting tiny jade or obsidian objects directly into the wounds. These objects were believed to serve as conduits for divine energy that would drive out the spirits causing the pain. The patient would wear these embedded objects for weeks or months, during which time the wounds would often become infected. The pus and inflammation were interpreted as signs that the evil spirits were being expelled from the body. Some patients died from these infections, but this was attributed to their spiritual weakness rather than to the treatment itself. The Maya also developed treatments based on their complex calendar system and astronomical observation. They believed that the human body was influenced by the same cosmic forces that governed the movement of planets and stars, leading to treatments that had to be precisely timed according to celestial events. For digestive problems, a patient might be required to fast for specific periods determined by the Maya calendar, then consume carefully prepared herbal mixtures only during particular astronomical alignment. The fasting periods could last for weeks, and the herbal mixtures often contained psychoactive plants that would cause hallucinations and altered states of consciousness. These hallucinations were considered an important part of the treatment, as they were believed to provide insight into the spiritual causes of the illness. Patients would be carefully monitored during these drug-induced experiences, with healers interpreting their visions and statements as messages from the spirit world. The Aztecs, who dominated central Mexico from the 14th to 16th centuries, developed even more extreme medical practices that reflected their culture's emphasis on sacrifice and blood ritual. They believed that many illnesses were caused by insufficient offerings to the gods, leading to treatments that often involved the patient making increasingly elaborate sacrifice. For chronic pain, Aztec healers might prescribe a treatment called blood debt payment, where the patient would be required to make daily offerings of their own blood to specific gods until their condition improved. This involved making small cuts on various parts of the body and allowing the blood to drip onto specially prepared altars. The amount of blood required would increase over time if the patient's condition didn't improve, sometimes reaching dangerous levels. Patients would often become severely anemic from these blood offerings, but weakness and fatigue were interpreted as signs that the gods were accepting their sacrifice and beginning the healing process. The Aztecs also believed that some illnesses were caused by the patient's failure to properly honor their deceased ancestors. Treatment for these conditions involved elaborate rituals where the patient would temporarily join their ancestors in the underworld while still alive. This involved being buried in specially prepared tombs for days at a time, with only small air holes to prevent suffocation. The patient would be provided with minimal food and water, and would be expected to communicate with their ancestors through dreams and visions brought on by hunger, dehydration, and sensory deprivation. Family members would maintain vigils outside the tomb, listening for signs that the patient was successfully communicating with the dead. The patient would remain buried until they reported having received specific messages or instructions from their ancestors about how to cure their illness. Many patients emerged from these underground ordeals in severely weakened condition, and some never emerged at all. But the Aztecs considered this a noble death, as it meant the person had successfully joined their ancestors in the afterlife. The Inca Empire, which stretched along the western coast of South America from the 13th to 16th centuries, developed medical practices that reflected their sophisticated understanding of geography and their belief in the healing power of specific locations. Inca healers believed that different types of illness could only be cured in specific geographical locations, leading to elaborate medical pilgrimages that could take patients hundreds of miles from their home. A person with respiratory problems might be required to travel to high-altitude locations in the Andes Mountains, where the thin air was believed to have purifying properties. But these weren't simple trips to different elevations. The journey itself was considered part of the treatment, and patients were required to follow specific routes, stop at particular sacred sites, and perform prescribed rituals at each location along the way. For example, a patient with joint problems might be required to walk barefoot along a specific mountain path, stopping at each sacred spring to bathe in the water and leave offerings to the mountain spirit. The journey could take weeks or months, and patients were often required to carry heavy loads of ritual objects and offerings, further stressing their already compromised health. The physical hardship of these journeys was considered essential to the healing process. Patients who couldn't complete the prescribed route were believed to lack the spiritual strength necessary for recovery, and their failure was seen as a sign that their illness was punishment for some moral transgression. The Inca also developed treatments based on their belief in the healing power of specific minerals and metals found in their mountain territory. For various ailments, patients would be required to consume powdered gold, silver, or other precious metals mixed with coca leaves and chica, a fermented corn beverage. The theory was that these pure metals would cleanse the body from within, driving out illness and restoring health. Of course, consuming metallic substances often caused severe poisoning, but the symptoms of metal toxicity were interpreted as signs that the treatment was working to purge impurities from the body. Wealthy Inca nobles might consume gold powder daily for months as a preventive measure against illness. The accumulation of metal in their systems often caused neurological problems, kidney damage, and other serious health issues, but these were seen as temporary side effects of the purification process. The ancient peoples of North America also developed their own unique medical tradition. Many Native American tribes believed that illness was often caused by the loss of the patient's soul or spirit, leading to elaborate retrieval ceremonies designed to call the wandering soul back to the body. These soul retrieval rituals could last for days and involve the entire community. The patient would be placed in the center of a large circle, while shamans performed increasingly intense ceremonies designed to locate and recapture the lost soul. The rituals often involved the use of various psychoactive plants and mushrooms that would induce altered states of consciousness in both the patient and the healers. During these drug-induced experiences, the shamans would report seeing the patient's soul in various locations, sometimes trapped by evil spirits, sometimes simply lost in the spirit world. The process of retrieving the soul involved elaborate negotiations with spirit beings, often requiring the patient or their family to make significant sacrifices or payments to secure the soul's return. These might include giving away valuable possessions, performing dangerous tasks, or even offering years of service to the tribe's spiritual leaders. As we move into medieval Europe, roughly from the 5th to the 15th centuries, we encounter a period where medical knowledge had regressed significantly from the achievements of ancient Greece and Rome. The fall of the Roman Empire had led to the loss of much classical medical knowledge, and what remained was often mixed with religious beliefs and superstitions that led to some truly bizarre treatment methods. Medieval European medicine was heavily influenced by the Christian Church, which viewed illness as either a test from God, punishment for sin, or the work of evil forces. This religious framework led to treatments that were more concerned with spiritual salvation than physical healing. One of the most common treatments for various ailments was bloodletting, but medieval physicians took this practice to extremes that would have horrified even their ancient predecessors. They believed that most illnesses were caused by an excess of bad blood, and that the solution was to remove as much of this corrupted fluid as possible. Medieval bloodletting wasn't just a matter of making a small cut and collecting some blood. Physicians would use leeches, cupping devices, and various cutting tools to drain large quantities of blood from patients, sometimes removing so much that the patient would go into shock or die from blood loss. But they didn't stop there. Different types of illness required blood to be drawn from different parts of the body, and the timing had to be precisely coordinated with religious holidays, phases of the moon, and the patient's astrological chart. For headaches, blood would be drawn from the temples, but only on Tuesdays during Lent, and only if the patient had confessed their sins within the previous week. For stomach problems, blood would be drawn from the arms, but only during the full moon, and only after the patient had fasted for 3 days while reciting specific prayers. Medieval physicians also believed that many illnesses were caused by corrupt air or bad vapors, leading to treatments designed to purify the patient's environment and breathing. For respiratory ailments, patients would be placed in rooms filled with smoke from burning combinations of herbs, incense, and other substances. But medieval smoke treatments were far more elaborate than their ancient counterparts. The substances burned would be chosen based on complex theological considerations. Certain herbs were associated with different saints, and the combination had to be appropriate for the patient's particular sin or spiritual condition. For example, a patient with lung problems, who was believed to be suffering from the sin of pride, might be exposed to smoke from burning thistle and wormwood, plants associated with humility and repentance. The patient would remain in the smoke-filled chamber for hours, often becoming severely oxygen-deprived and disoriented. The altered mental state that resulted was interpreted as a spiritual experience, with physicians carefully noting any words or sounds the patient made while under the influence of smoke inhalation. These utterances were often interpreted as messages from God or confessions of hidden sins that needed to be addressed as part of the treatment. Medieval Europe also saw the development of treatments based on the belief that physical illness was often a manifestation of moral corruption. This led to the practice of therapeutic penance, where patients would be required to perform increasingly severe acts of self-punishment as part of their medical treatment. For chronic pain, A patient might be required to wear a hair shirt, a garment made from coarse animal hair that would constantly irritate the skin for months at a time. The discomfort was believed to purify the soul and drive out the spiritual causes of the physical pain. More severe conditions might require more extreme forms of penance. A patient with a serious illness might be required to crawl on their hands and knees to a distant shrine, stopping at each church along the way to confess their sins and receive additional penances from local priests. These religious pilgrimages could take months or years to complete, during which time the patient's medical condition would often deteriorate significantly. But any worsening of symptoms was interpreted as a sign that the patient needed to perform even more severe acts of penance to achieve healing. Medieval physicians also developed treatments based on their belief in the power of relics and sacred objects. For various ailments, patients would be required to spend extended periods in direct contact with religious artifacts, believed to have healing properties. This might involve sleeping on the bones of saints, drinking water that had been blessed by touching holy relics, or wearing amulets made from materials associated with religious figures. The more severe the illness, the more powerful the relic required, leading to a thriving market in religious artifacts of questionable authenticity. Wealthy patients might pay enormous sums for the opportunity to spend a night sleeping next to what was claimed to be a piece of the true cross, or a bone from a major saint. The psychological impact of these expensive treatments was often significant, but the physical results were typically disappointing. Medieval dentistry was particularly brutal, even by the standards of the time. Dental problems were often attributed to toothworms, tiny creatures that were believed to burrow into teeth and cause decay and pain. Treatment involved elaborate procedures designed to kill or drive out these imaginary parasites. For toothaches, medieval dentists would heat metal probes until they were red hot, then insert them into the cavity to burn out the toothworms. This often resulted in severe damage to the tooth and surrounding tissue, frequently leading to infections that were worse than the original problem. For more serious dental issues, medieval dentists developed a procedure called worm extraction, where they would use various tools to scrape out the decayed portions of teeth while claiming to be removing actual worms. They would often show patients small pieces of debris scraped from the tooth, claiming these were the worms that had been causing the problem. Medieval medicine also included treatments for mental illness that reflected the period's religious preoccupations and fear of demonic influence. Mental illness was often attributed to possession by evil spirits, leading to treatments that were essentially exorcism rituals disguised as medical procedures. Patients with mental illness would be subjected to elaborate purification rituals involving holy water, blessed oils, and constant prayer. They would often be restrained for days or weeks while priests performed increasingly intense exorcism ceremonies designed to drive out the possessing demon. These exorcism treatments could be extremely violent, with patients being beaten, burned with hot irons, and subjected to various forms of torture that were justified as necessary to make their bodies inhospitable to evil spirits. Many patients died during these treatments, but their deaths were attributed to the strength of the demons possessing them, rather than to the brutality of the treatment itself. As we near the end of our journey through the strange world of ancient medicine, it's worth taking a moment to consider why these civilizations developed such bizarre and often harmful treatment. Understanding the psychology behind these practices helps us appreciate both how far medical science has come and why these treatments sometimes seem to work despite their obvious flaws. One of the most important factors to consider is the placebo effect, the phenomenon where patients experience genuine improvement in their condition simply because they believe they're receiving effective treatment. In ancient times, when the actual mechanisms of disease were poorly understood, the placebo effect may have been one of the most powerful medical tools available. Many of the elaborate, expensive, and time-consuming treatments we've discussed would have generated strong placebo effect. When a patient underwent weeks of complex rituals, consumed rare and costly ingredients, or endured significant discomfort as part of their treatment, they were likely to experience some degree of improvement simply because they believed the treatment was powerful and effective. The social and psychological context of these treatments was also crucial. In many ancient cultures, illness was seen as a community problem rather than just an individual one. The elaborate ceremonies and rituals that surrounded medical treatment served to mobilize social support for the patient, which could have genuine therapeutic benefits. When an entire village participated in a healing ceremony, when family members made sacrifices on behalf of the patient, or when the patient underwent a public ordeal that demonstrated their commitment to recovery, these social dynamics could contribute to actual improvements in health and well-being. The element of suffering that characterized many ancient treatments may also have had psychological benefits that the practitioners didn't fully understand. Modern psychology recognizes that people often value things more highly when they've had to work for them or endure hardship to obtain them. Patients who underwent painful, expensive, or difficult treatments may have been more likely to report improvement because they had invested so much in the process. The cognitive dissonance of admitting that such elaborate treatments were ineffective would have been psychologically uncomfortable, leading patients to focus on any signs of improvement while downplaying ongoing symptoms. The religious and spiritual frameworks that surrounded ancient medicine also provided psychological benefits that may have contributed to healing. The belief that illness was connected to spiritual or moral issues gave patients a sense of control over their condition. If they could address the spiritual causes through proper treatment and behavior, they could potentially cure them. This sense of agency and control is now recognized as an important factor in medical outcomes. Patients who feel they have some power over their condition often experience better outcomes than those who feel helpless and passive. Ancient medical systems, despite their bizarre methods, often empowered patients to take active roles in their own healing. The elaborate diagnostic systems used by ancient physicians also served important psychological functions. When a healer spent considerable time examining a patient, asking detailed questions about their symptoms and lifestyle, and providing complex explanations for their condition, this attention and apparent expertise could be deeply reassuring to the patient. The fact that these explanations were often completely wrong from a medical standpoint didn't diminish their psychological impact. Patients who received detailed authoritative explanations for their symptoms were likely to feel more confident about their treatment and more optimistic about their recovery. The ceremonial aspects of ancient medicine also served to create what modern psychologists call sacred time and space, periods and places set apart from ordinary life where healing could occur. The elaborate rituals, special locations, and formal procedures that characterized ancient treatments helped create an atmosphere where patients could focus entirely on their recovery. This psychological separation from daily concerns and responsibilities may have had genuine therapeutic benefits, particularly for conditions that were stress-related or psychosomatic in nature. The opportunity to step outside normal social roles and expectations, even temporarily, could provide relief from psychological pressures that may have been contributing to illness. However, it's important to note that these psychological benefits came at a tremendous cost. Many ancient treatments caused genuine harm, and the temporary improvements that some patients experienced were often followed by worsening conditions or death from the treatments themselves. The lack of systematic observation and record-keeping in ancient medicine meant that practitioners rarely learned from their failures. Treatments that killed or harmed patients were often attributed to the patient's spiritual weakness, insufficient faith, or the severity of their condition rather than to problems with the treatment itself. This created a system where harmful practices could persist for centuries, because their failures were consistently explained away rather than acknowledged and addressed. The psychological power of these treatments to generate hope and temporary improvement often masked their fundamental medical inadequacy. The social status and authority of ancient healers also contributed to the persistence of bizarre treatment. In most ancient cultures, medical practitioners held positions of considerable respect and power. Their treatments were often protected by religious authority or royal patronage, making it difficult for patients or other observers to question their effectiveness. The combination of social authority, religious sanction, and complex theoretical frameworks created systems that were largely immune to criticism from below. Patients who failed to improve could be blamed for their own lack of faith or compliance, while the fundamental assumptions of the medical system remained unquestioned. As our journey through ancient medical practices draws to a close, it's worth reflecting on how we eventually moved from these bizarre treatments to the evidence-based medicine we know today. The transition wasn't sudden. It took centuries of gradual progress, with many setbacks and false starts along the way. The Renaissance period, roughly from the 14th to 17th centuries, marked the beginning of a more systematic approach to understanding the human body. The revival of interest in classical learning led to the rediscovery of ancient Greek and Roman medical texts, but also to a more critical examination of their content. Anatomical studies became more rigorous during this period, with physicians like Andreas Vesalius conducting detailed dissections of human cadavers and documenting their findings with unprecedented accuracy. These studies revealed that many of the assumptions underlying ancient medical theories were simply wrong. For example, the discovery of the actual structure of the circulatory system gradually undermined the humoral theories that had dominated medicine for over 1,000 years. When physicians could see exactly how blood moved through the body, it became harder to maintain that illness was caused by imbalances of mysterious bodily fluids. The development of the scientific method during the 16th and 17th centuries provided a framework for testing medical theories more rigorous. Physicians began to conduct controlled experiments and systematic observations, comparing the outcomes of different treatments and looking for patterns in their results. This shift toward empirical observation was revolutionary, but it happened slowly and faced considerable resistance. Many physicians continued to rely on traditional authorities and theoretical frameworks rather than direct observation, and patients often preferred elaborate traditional treatments to simpler but more effective approaches. The invention of new instruments and technologies also played a crucial role in advancing medical knowledge. The microscope, developed in the 17th century, revealed the existence of microorganisms and provided the first glimpses into the cellular structure of living tissue. These discoveries gradually led to new theories about the causes of disease. The idea that illness might be caused by tiny invisible organisms was initially met with skepticism, but as the evidence accumulated, it became harder to ignore. The development of vaccination in the 18th century provided one of the first clear demonstrations of the power of evidence-based medicine. Edward Jenner's work with smallpox vaccination showed that systematic observation and controlled testing could lead to treatments that were dramatically more effective than traditional approaches. The success of vaccination was particularly important because it provided a stark contrast to the elaborate but ineffective treatments that had dominated medicine for centuries. Here was a simple procedure: the introduction of a small amount of cowpox material into the body that could prevent one of humanity's most feared diseases. The 19th century saw accelerating progress in medical understanding, with the development of germ theory, improved surgical techniques, and the beginnings of modern pharmacology. The discovery that many diseases were caused by specific microorganisms finally provided a rational framework for understanding illness and developing effective treatments. This period also saw the establishment of more rigorous standards for medical education and practice. Medical schools began to require systematic study of anatomy, physiology, and pathology, rather than simply memorizing traditional texts and theories. The development of anesthesia and antiseptic techniques made surgery safer and more effective, while the discovery of various drugs and treatments provided alternatives to the bloodletting, purging, and other harmful practices that had persisted for centuries. However, it's important to note that the transition to modern medicine wasn't complete until well into the 20th century. Many bizarre and harmful treatments continued to be used alongside more effective approaches, and some traditional practices proved remarkably persistent. Bloodletting, for example, remained a common treatment for various conditions well into the 19th century, despite growing evidence of its ineffectiveness. The psychological and cultural factors that had sustained these practices for centuries didn't disappear overnight simply because better alternatives became available. The development of controlled clinical trials in the 20th century provided the final piece of the puzzle for evidence-based medicine. The ability to systematically compare different treatments and measure their effectiveness objectively finally gave physicians the tools they needed to distinguish between genuinely helpful treatments and those that only appeared to work due to psychological factors. This scientific approach to medicine has led to tremendous advances in our ability to treat disease and improve human health. Modern medicine, for all its remaining limitations, is dramatically more effective than anything available to our ancestors. Yet even today, we continue to discover that some treatments we thought were helpful are actually ineffective or harmful. The history of medicine is littered with therapies that were once widely accepted but later abandoned as new evidence emerged. This ongoing process of discovery and revision is one of the key differences between modern medicine and the ancient practices we've discussed. While ancient physicians often clung to traditional treatments regardless of their outcomes, modern medicine is built on a foundation of continuous questioning and improvement. The bizarre treatments of ancient civilizations serve as a reminder of how easy it is for even intelligent, well-intentioned people to develop elaborate but incorrect theories about health and disease. They also highlight the importance of systematic observation, controlled testing, and willingness to abandon cherished beliefs when the evidence contradicts. As we reach the end of our journey through the strange and often disturbing world of ancient medicine, it's worth reflecting on what these historical practices can teach us about human nature, the development of knowledge, and the eternal human struggle against disease and suffering. Perhaps the most striking lesson is how creative and determined our ancestors were in their attempts to heal the sick. Despite having little understanding of anatomy, physiology, or the actual causes of disease, they developed elaborate systems of medical theory and practice that reflected their deepest beliefs about the nature of life, death, and human existence. These ancient healers weren't simply ignorant or superstitious. They were working within the conceptual frameworks available to them, using the best knowledge and reasoning they possessed. The fact that their treatments were often bizarre or harmful by our standards doesn't diminish the genuine desire to help that motivated their work. The persistence of these practices across different cultures and time periods also demonstrates something important about human psychology. People facing illness and death are naturally drawn to treatments that offer hope, even when those treatments are unpleasant, expensive, or difficult to endure. The elaborate nature of many ancient treatments may actually have increased their psychological ability. In a world where the causes of disease were mysterious and frightening, complex rituals and procedures provided a sense that something meaningful was being done to address the problem. This psychological dynamic hasn't disappeared with the advent of modern medicine. Even today, patients often prefer expensive, high-tech treatments to simpler approaches, and alternative medicine practitioners continue to attract followers by offering elaborate explanations and complex treatment protocols. The social dimensions of ancient medicine also offer important insights. In most traditional cultures, healing was a community activity that involved family members, religious leaders, and other members of society. This social support network may have provided genuine therapeutic benefits that we sometimes overlook in our modern focus on individual treatment. The isolation that many patients experience in modern medical settings, being treated by strangers in unfamiliar environments, separated from their support networks, represents a loss that ancient patients rarely had to endure. While our treatments are far more effective, we may have something to learn from ancient approaches to the social and emotional aspects of healing. The religious and spiritual dimensions of ancient medicine also remind us that illness has always been more than just a biological phenomenon. For most of human history, sickness and health were understood within broader frameworks of meaning that connected individual suffering to cosmic purposes and divine will. While we now understand that disease is primarily a biological process, the human need to find meaning in suffering, modern medicine's focus on technical effectiveness, while crucial, sometimes leaves patients struggling with existential questions that ancient healing systems addressed directly. The gradual development of more effective treatments over the centuries also illustrates the importance of intellectual humility and openness to new ideas. The physicians who finally abandoned bloodletting, embraced germ theory, and developed modern surgical techniques had to overcome not just ignorance, but centuries of established tradition and professional authority. This process of questioning established beliefs and testing new approaches continues today. Medical knowledge is constantly evolving, with new discoveries regularly overturning previous assumptions and practices. The history of medicine reminds us that what seems obviously true today may be proven wrong tomorrow. The bizarre treatments we've discussed tonight also highlight the crucial importance of systematic observation and controlled testing in developing effective therapy. Ancient physicians often relied on theoretical reasoning, traditional authority, or anecdotal evidence to support their practice. While these approaches sometimes led to useful discoveries, they more often perpetuated harmful treatments because they couldn't reliably distinguish between genuine therapeutic effects and psychological factors like the placebo effect, spontaneous recovery, or selective memory. The development of rigorous methods for testing medical treatments represents one of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements. The ability to conduct controlled trials, analyze statistical data, and draw reliable conclusions about treatment effectiveness has saved countless lives and reduced immeasurable suffering. Yet, even with these powerful tools, medical research continues to reveal the complexity and subtlety of biological systems. Many conditions that seemed simple to our ancestors, and even to physicians just a few decades ago, have proven to involve intricate interactions between genetic, environmental, psychological, and social factors. This complexity reminds us that while we should be grateful for how far medical science has advanced, we should also remain humble about how much we still don't understand. The history of medicine is full of confident proclamations that later proved to be completely wrong. As you drift off to sleep tonight, perhaps you can find some comfort in knowing that, whatever health challenges you may face, you live in an age when effective treatment is more likely to be available than at any previous time in human history. The strange and often frightening practices we've explored tonight represent humanity's long struggle to understand and combat disease. While our ancestors' methods were often misguided, their determination to heal the sick and reduce suffering continues to inspire the medical professionals who care for us today. The next time you visit a doctor, take a medication, or undergo a medical procedure, remember the long journey of discovery and innovation that made these modern miracles possible. From the trepanation skulls of ancient civilizations to the sophisticated treatments available today, each generation has built upon the knowledge of those who came before. Rest well knowing that the bizarre medical treatments of the past have been replaced by approaches based on scientific understanding, systematic observation, and genuine concern for patient welfare. While medicine will continue to evolve and improve, we can be grateful that we no longer need to fear the cure more than the disease. Sweet dreams, and may your sleep be filled with peaceful thoughts of how far humanity has come in its eternal quest to heal and be healed.